Laura. It's an honor being here. Thank
Yeah.
you very much for inviting me. As you was my previous lead, I'm really excited to talk about this, all of the characters basically, since we discussed them briefly when you were leading at Eidos, when we started the project.
When I left, there really wasn't much done for Rocket. There really wasn't much done for Groot, So I really had a chance to really discover that project with pretty much everyone else when you had dropped the first trailer. I think it was even just like 6 months ago, right? Or so, or maybe a bit longer than that. But yeah, the project did take a long time to put together, right? Like, I think in the beginning we were talking about a project that would take something like 2 to 3 years, as is kind of always the case with every video game project ever. And then reality sort of sinks in, and then projects usually wind up being a bit longer than that. So the whole project did take a while, right?
Yeah, it took, since I joined, it took 4 years, but I know that there was already pre-production done a year before that. That's where you were part of. So yeah, it took, I think it took around 5 years to finalize the whole project. Yeah, I remember that we also had, when you were there, we had Gamora as well finished as a concept. So I remember us trying, like playing with a proxy mesh to get something close. And I'm curious, actually, what did you think they would look like in the end? Because you left before we actually made the models. So what did you actually think they would look like?
I was fully expecting them to look completely different just based off of how these things usually go. Like, I'm sort of thinking of like Deus Ex, like the first one, like Jensen. We had remade the character like a few times throughout production. There was a Thief too that was produced at Eidos Montreal. Like the main character of that game also went through a lot of changes, So I don't really know, but what I do know is that the art style and the visual style of the game was really, really strong right from the beginning. It was a really fun project to work on. I was really excited to see where you all were going to take it, because right at the beginning, it really felt like this was a project that was going to have its own unique visual identity there. So yeah, I think you all have done a super fantastic job with that.
Thank you.
So you're here to essentially break down some of the characters that you have worked on and that your team has worked on. Where do you want to get started with that?
Gamora, adopted daughter of Thanos, deadliest woman in the galaxy.
Yeah, so I remember when we received the concept, you and me were looking at it, and I said that I'm going to try to do something in Marvel's Designer for the hard surface part of the costume. If you see here, all of the different separations in the costume itself, I did that in Marvel's Designer because it was easy for me to visualize all the panels and how they are going to work with each other. So first I built them. I built like the base, an overall basically skin tight suit. And then I started cutting out the different patterns. And then I brought all of them in ZBrush and then just remesh, Z-remesh or manual retop in some cases because some things were a bit too complex. So just doing that, and then I would Z-model the rest of it, basically give it thickness and all the little details and stuff like that.
It's actually very, very intuitive to do that. So like that's a really awesome workflow, by the way,
For the rest of the parts, like for example, the arms and stuff, like these really clean shapes and everything, this was done in ZBrush right away. So it was Z-modeler and some Dynamesh in some parts where I basically retoppled on top, and then I was tweaking the shape and everything to have clean geometry. Because I in general, I like to have clean geometry in ZBrush. So with all my subdivision levels, so I can always go back and tweak things very easily.
I can work with that.
All of the rest of the folds, as you may know, is not designer, it's just basically hand sculpted.
Sorcery.
Did you show us the folds over the legs there? Because they're really beautiful. Yeah. They're really awesome. Yeah, it's super cool. I love how you feel that there's some of those tension folds coming from the crotch down. That's really cool. That's very realistic to have that.
And the small folds basically are activated by the straps and the pulling and pushing from the sides.
Yeah.
So for the hair, we didn't have a solution in the beginning, and we used to have in the studio the lead rigging guy, whose name is Lee Dunham. He was one of my very good friends at the studio. So I would go to him and I'll be like, "Hey Lee, I need some tool to actually model the hair for these characters." And he was always so fast and so creative into basically giving me a script for Maya in a few days, in a day or two. So what he did is he built us a tool where you would create your own hair cards, just like you do for normal characters, basically. And then it would rig these hair cards into a spline, and you would only style the hair by placing these splines on the head, basically. So I would make the head a live model in Maya, and then I would just move one of these splines with the hair cards already attached to it, with a chunk of hairs attached to it, and then I would tweak the spline to give it the shape and the flow that I wanted. And not only I could have like really smooth transition, but I could also have twisting on different parts of the spline. And on top of this, the tool allowed me to duplicate splines with the hair cards themselves. So that came in very, very handy. I think he saved the hair in the game by doing that, because doing it manually, not only it would take a lot of time for us, but also it was difficult to do like different variations or like to change things and everything.
Can I just say thank you for not choosing to display Gamora with huge boobs, and for being brave to show her using a different body morphology than all the huge boobed characters that we have in like video games now. Like, I think it's really amazing that the team decided to like, hey, no, let's actually give her like realistic breast size and stuff. Like, I think that's actually really cool.
I'm happy about it too, and I'm glad that Bruno and Fred really kept their like, we want her to look like this, and they presented it to Marvel, and Marvel was okay with it. So I was actually really glad to do that. Like, we don't have to have always extreme characters everywhere. Yeah.
No, that's super cool. Like, she's like sexy, but she's not sexualized, and I think that's
exactly
really cool.
She has all this cool armor and everything. Yeah, she does have heels, but that's because she has the claws on her feet.
Oh, so yeah. But that's
it's
cool,
part of her attacks, So yeah.
Yeah, but that's totally reasonable there. Like, that's not like heels that are sort of like this. So yeah. Like, it looks like appropriate outfit to go out in combat. So I think that's really good.
Groot, a Flora Colossus, last of his kind, fearless in a firefight, an awesome best friend.
I wanted to look super high res at all angles, at all possible, close-ups and everything. But at the same time, he's so complex in his design, and he has so many pieces that if I just followed the normal way of making a character, then it will look very, very blurry in the game. Mm-hmm. So that's why in this case I did like a tech R&D side project. How I'm going to approach the wood, the bark, and the moss. How is the moss going to be? Is it going to be hair cards, or is it going to be just texture? Is texture even enough for this case? And it wasn't enough. So most of the time that I spent on this R&D was about getting the substance designer materials to look good, like to look how we wanted them. We were not going for a photorealistic kind of wood and bark, because that was not the point of the art direction. But we have to be very specific, like how we wanted the wood to actually look. So after that R&D project was done, actually modeling the rest of Groot, it was very, very fast as well. And texturing, it was probably the fastest process of all.
So Groot is essentially a series of, in a way, he's a series of tiling materials that tile using different UVs that are carefully arranged.
What I did is I have one UV set where I lay down the pieces, and I don't care too much about the orientation of them. And of course, I cannot use this UV set and apply my wood textures on it, because then the grain would not be it would not follow a specific flow, basically. So what I did is I created another UV set, a secondary UV set, where I started laying down all of these parts, all of these pieces, and then, for example, here I would even like do I would make cuts in the actual mesh itself in the UV, of course. Yeah, so I would cut, for example, the UV here. I would make another cut here. And since this is all tileable, you don't actually see the seams. Mm-hmm. And this allowed me to rearrange the wood chunks basically to be all straight. If you notice here, the grain goes this way, but here it kind of flows a little bit like so.
Yeah.
So all of that movement, I get it in the UV itself.
That's because you took the UVs and you rotated them slightly on your second UV set, yes. And it's the second UV set that has the tiling wood grain.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So the UV set 1, then you're using that for like perhaps to bake a unique normal map for the character.
Yes, that's right. That's because I already sculpted a lot of details in ZBrush. The reason for that is that you still want to have the high poly feel to it. Because if I didn't bake a normal map, a master normal in this case, you would only see the tilables and you would still feel that it's a low poly model.
Yeah.
So basically the UV set 1 is just used for that to have the master normal, and on top of that, it's also important. It's used to actually texture the mask where the different type of wood goes. So since every space of every part, it has its own unique space in UV set 1, I could paint basically where I want the wood, where I want the moss, and where I want the bark. And then, but all of those materials are being tiled through UV set 2, but using UV set 1 as the mask.
It's like a detail map approach, but on steroids. Yeah, it's really, really cool.
I am Groot.
He says we should combine both ideas.
On the first UV set, I also have a base color where I kind of give it a little bit of the wet look or the mossy feel. Like it basically colorizes all of my other textures a little bit. So, for example, for the base wood, it gives it a little bit of moist, makes it a bit more alive. So it's just having some kind of like greens and oranges in there. And then all these textures are very small, by the way. It's everything is either 512 or 1K, except for the master normal, which is 2K in this case. Even the tilables are small as well. Like the most important ones are usually 1K, I would say. Yeah, they never go higher than that.
Can you tell us a little bit about the moss and how you achieve the look of the moss?
Oh yeah? You want moss?
I basically just did a very simple hair card approach. I built in Maya basically some chunks of hair cards that I was placing manually on top of the moss where I had my shader moss showing basically. Mm-hmm. So I could see in the model, I could see where I painted the moss part, and I was just placing these chunks on top of it.
What would the texture sheets look like for Groot? You know, like all of the kind of rig that he has like on top of him, these sorts of things. Was that like as a separate, like saved as a separate texture set? Was that the same texture set as the rest of the character? Like, what was your approach there?
Yeah, so Groot is actually is made out of I think 4 texture sets. Yeah, it's 4 texture sets, and there's the head, there's the whole harness with a backpack and the side net. And then there is the plates, which are all of the plates that go on top of his body. But also there is one other texture set, which is the skeleton. So when I first approached Groot, I thought that I will build a skeleton underneath. And then I will have all of these other pieces as plates that go on top. And the reason for that was that I was thinking maybe later in production, they would want, for example, pieces to fall off or to break or to change the look a little bit, and it would have been a way easier for me to handle that. So that's why I separated this. But not only that, but it also gave a lot of depth to the character as well. thanks to the lighting and shadows and everything. So the skeleton texture set is probably 512. It's very small, the normal and the base color and the rest. So, and on top of that, he's sharing all of the textures, all of the tileables. So it's not really much complex. Cosmo.
Yeah.
So I asked back then. I asked the tech department, can we use Rocket's fur, like the same technology as Rocket? But the problem was that since we have 5 main characters on screen all the time, adding another one with fur, it would basically be overkill.
It's not being so easy.
After that, I decided to just go with haircuts. So what I did is I sculpted the body of Cosmo in ZBrush. I had like a base mesh underneath. So I went to Maya and I made like a simple groom, especially for the face here. So I had like my guides basically going all the way, giving the flow of the hair and everything. And basically what this allowed me is to convert all of these Xgen hairs into haircuts, so just simple haircuts, right? And then I baked also a texture with the actual hair, like with different densities. So you'll have like different hair density and another one with less, like so, and another one with even less. And I used the higher density cards all over his face. And then I would just start placing different cards on top of it to basically fill in the void where there were like holes and stuff, where you could see through the skin. So I kept placing cards and cards and cards manually until I got like the final full look of the face. And here I also did like a very specific trick with UV Set 2, because I wanted to be able to have the same, to have these haircuts blend perfectly with the model underneath. So what I did is I placed all the haircuts, and in in UV1, they each, they have basically the alpha atlas for the cards. And on UV Set 2, I transferred the UV from the head to the cards, and I used that for the color information. So in this case, I could just plug in the same base color as the head, and they would basically match perfectly right away.
When we're actually looking at the hair right now, it's like you can't actually, like the hair blends so well with the mesh underneath that you really can't tell them apart, you know? How many polygons does this character wind up having, do you think, in the end?
Yeah, most of them range from 120 to 150 in general. Triangles, not polygons. Yeah.
And thousands, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Every video game seems to be in, like, that seems to be the sweet spot. Like, every character that I see left and right, the sweet spot right now really seems to be like 150,000 triangles per character, you know?
For the PS5 version, it's always LOD 0 when it's close up and when you have all the characters and everything. But for the PS4, I think it's LOD 1.
Okay.
For some of the characters, like not for the main characters, but like secondary characters, when they are not that close, it's usually LOD 1.
But in cinematics, of course, on both consoles, it's LOD 0 that is shown, of course.
Yes, yeah. Exactly.
Okay. What about those folds on Cosmo's suit that we can see, right? Like, I'm sort of looking at those and I'm like, that's marvelous design, right? You've gone and you just simulated all of those, right?
Do not feed Cosmo cat biscuits, Peter Quill.
Kind of. Like, as you know, when I joined Eidos, thanks to you, I learned how to sculpt folds because I was not that good at it, and I really it was like my lowest skill, I would say. Like I couldn't really get the feel of folds to work properly. So in this case, well, actually, most of the characters for the game that I personally did, I used Marvelous Designer very little. And that's because I find it that for me, it takes a bit more time to get the look that I want from Marvel's designer. So I always keep fighting with the software. Like I want folds here and don't put them there, and don't pull the cloth on this side and pull less, you know. So in that case, I would just build like a very basic, like just to get like the main shape of the whole thing, and then I would bring it to ZBrush and then I would hand sculpt most of it. So what you see here right now with Cosmo, probably like 20 or 30% of it is Marvel's designer. The rest is all hand sculpted.
What it makes me realize is that, you know, what we miss within video game studios isn't necessarily people who have the technical knowledge of Marvel's designer, although that is very useful to have, but it's just people who really understand folds really, really well. Even if you know the technical side of the software, but you don't actually know what proper folds should look like in different contexts on the character, it doesn't matter that you know the software or not, right? It's like, because the software is going to spit out something and you won't be able to know whether that is the result you should be expecting out of it or not, you know? So at the end of the day, really what you need is just strong knowledge of, okay, this is what folds are supposed to look like. But then when you have that knowledge, then it's also not clear that you need Marvel's designer in there, you know?
So I find it useful with Marvel's designer to just get the base shape first, because it's I don't have to like start sculpting or create polygons or anything. I just start right away with a pattern and I make it fit, and I give it the shape that I want and all that. And when it's actually the detailing process of it, then I don't really need to keep trying in Marvel's designer. I will just import in ZBrush and start sculpting, because once you learn the anatomy of folds, it's very easy to understand how and where those folds are created and what type of folds they are, and how they interact with the other objects that you have, for example, in ZBrush, but you don't have in Marvelous.
We have a video on that on the YouTube page, by the way, so go and watch that.
Almost as important as human anatomy.
I think they're both on the same level, you know, because like you can always start from scans for like bodies, and if you're on production, then, you know, you may join production where all the base bodies have been made. It's conceivable that you may work on the production and you may not even have to do anatomy work, you know, beyond faces, you know, but you cannot get away from having to work on folds. Yeah.
Yeah, I was lucky that I had George in my team because he is the anatomy guy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he's the beast. So George would be like, I would always send him the anatomy heavy stuff, basically. For example, like Lady Hellbender. And on top of that, on my team, I also had a technical and artistical guy, which is Emmanuel Lecoutier. For him, it was kind of the same, you know, whatever that was like technical and stuff, I'll be like, okay, Manu, can you take a look at this and see if you can find a solution for it? And it was done. Like,
Is it working?
Yeah, don't worry, sunshine.
Ooh, I love this character so much.
What's in the box?
That's Nivan's work, right?
yeah, it screams Nivan as soon as you see it.
Doesn't it?
The same with Rocket. Yeah, it's a beautiful design. Yeah.
Like, he's like one of the most amazing concept artists ever. He makes these highly creative designs that are just out of this world good. And he's the most humble person to talk to, you know? He's so humble, he's so positive, just a joy to work with, you know?
Yeah, so but these characters in general, they are way more less poly than the main characters, of course, because you see a lot of them around. I think this one is around 60k triangles.
There's also no hair, right? So you can actually cut out a lot of polygons there.
Yeah, and a lot of it is like, for example, all the ripping part is all alpha. There's stylables as well in the material itself, in the texturing. So I really wanted to get like a really nice leather look, and the same thing for the skull itself. I made a tileable for the skull, because even though it's an enemy and an NPC, I still wanted it to look quite sharp and in close up.
About the scarf, was that all hand sculpted, by the way?
Oh yeah, that was all hand sculpted.
Wow.
Yeah. It was fun to sculpt all those folds. It was quite fun.
Dweller! Feast upon them!
Like, this was another character that when we first saw the concept, we were like, okay, nobody wants to do it. We were asking each other, like, oh, do you want to do this character? Do you want to do this character? At one point, I think it was supposed to be George to model it, but then he got busy with some other character, and I was like, okay, you know, I'll start because this they need it. They need it soon to test the gameplay part and to test the levels and everything. So starting from scratch, like where do you even start? Because he's very parametric and he's very like the design itself is very parametric. So in this case, I mostly use Substance Designer to model the thing. Well, what I mean with that is that I've modeled like a base mesh in ZBrush, and all the detailing part and the repeating patterns are all done in Designer. But at the same time, I would use these Designer height maps basically and displacements as details in ZBrush. So at any point, I could change the complete look of him, and all of the details that I already done in Designer, they were already ready to be used again. And on top of that, this allowed me to use the same details as tileables in the engine. So for example, where you see the upper part of his head that is all a tileable is not actually sculpted or textured. So that's all coming from the maps in Designer, and it really allowed me to go and freely modify the model without worrying too much about it.
Mm-hmm.
All of the details, like the small skin pores and everything, is Substance Designer, which is tiled in engine. I have a planned talk at GDC about this with Adobe. Where we're going to discuss a little bit of all the making of and technical stuff. Like there, I'll be able to show more information, all of the workflow and everything.
Rocket, bona fide super genius and a wizard with explosives. Definitely not a raccoon.
Yeah, so for Rocket, for the fur itself, it's all the fur tech.
How's that even gonna work?
What it is that every strand is actually a real polygonal strand, I would say. It's rendering each of them separately.
It does help to give a nice 3D effect to the whole hair, you know?
It's very important when you light the character because you get all the shadows and the volume and everything. So if it's hair card, you will start to notice the flatness of the cars themselves. And on top of that, it reacts with the wind, it reacts with the wetness, like we said before, in the level, and that was very important. Like in the end, it's Rocket. It's a very important character of the game, and it has to look the best, you know.
Yeah.
Adorable.
You got some really nice detail maps, by the way, going on for like the closed air. I really love the kind of golden effect that you have.
So I got in trouble for that because I was not supposed to use metalness on the cloth itself, you know.
Okay, I'm sure it's just one big misunderstanding.
But in the end, if I kept like a very low value of it and I cranked the roughness up a little bit, it did not affect the lighting in any scene. So to me, it looked fine. Every lighting condition, it looked fine. So I left it.
So the maleness not being either black or white in this case, but some shade of gray.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. It's a very faint white in this case, like gray. Yeah,
nice. Yeah.
I used it in many different characters. So, for example, probably the best example of that is Raker.
Grand Unifier Raker, leader of the Church of Universal something.
On Raker, I only modeled the body and the arms and everything. So here, if you notice, this whole costume, which also is hand sculpted, it was not marvelous.
Sorcery. I can understand how some might see it that way.
This one has metalness everywhere. Because I really needed to have that kind of sheen effect to the material, and we didn't have a shader that would allow us to do that without using metalness.
Like on at 100%, or there too, it's kind of a blend?
No, it's a blend.
Some really nice leather you got there, by the way.
Will explain how you did it?
Yeah, that was a mix between hand sculpting. So, for example, for the leather, if you notice all of these lines and stuff, those are actually added in Painter. And the rest is just using one tileable, like a leather tileable, and of course some hand sculpting for the shape and the volumes and stuff.
You had actually designed and created yourself a series of sculpting brushes.
Yes.
For Painter, right?
So I made it for myself at first, like to use it for myself, a set of sculpting brushes within Painter. So I could add detail wherever I needed, like really, really fast. And I could erase it wherever I needed. So if, for example, I wasn't happy, I would just erase it. And it was really, really helpful throughout the production.
That is a cool trick.
And that's called Carve, right? And people can go and check that out if they actually want to acquire that.
Yeah, there's a free version which has a standard brush. That's I would say try it and see if it works for you. But even just with the free version, you can do the job easily.
Yeah. I actually remember we had Ben and Sam on, and they were actually talking about how everyone at Blizzard was like actually using those. So I don't know if you know how popular your own sculpting brushes are, but it seems that they are.
I didn't know. A friend of mine from Blizzard, he told me that, hey, I saw them use your tool. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay, that's so cool. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Last and definitely least, Peter Jason Quill.
He went through more hairstyle changes than Gamora ever did.
Hey, watch the hair.
There was actually one case I remember. We were working before with a proxy model and proxy hair. Like throughout the production of the game until very late in production, we were working with this proxy hair, and it was this pompadour kind of funny guy feeling to him.
Aren't you a little old for that hairdo?
And we are doing all the lighting passes and we're doing all the cinematic and everything, and the hair looks horrible because it was a proxy. So they gave me the go, and I did a version which is very similar to what it is now in the game. However, the hair was not that long and it was more sticking to the face, and it changed the feel of the face of the character completely. And they were shocked. They were like, but we don't recognize Star-Lord anymore. It's not the same guy.
You're still the same.
I've changed.
I went back and I tweaked it, and I made sure it really brought back all that vibe that he had in the beginning. So, and that's the last. Basically, this is the hairstyle that he ended up with the game.
Oh, that's a rocker vibe, so I think it suits the character really well. Yeah.
It fits him perfectly with his personality, basically.
You like Black Sabbath?
So on this case, I only did the face and the hair and some texturing on the jacket. The rest of it was done by George. Really beautiful, like sculpted model as well. Even the folds and everything. So
It's
really
super
proud
nice.
of that.
Yeah.
For the faces, so the idea was in the beginning to start with scanned data. But then we saw that with the concept, like it doesn't fit the concept at all. And there is one thing that the concept was approved by Marvel, so of course it has to look like the concept. So in that case, we decided to tone down the scanning, and we only used it for the blend shapes actually. So all of the expressions are scanned from the actors, but the face itself only has like 10-20% of the actor. That's basically what we did. So we hand sculpted all of the faces, and that was the only way that we could make it fit with the concept and the approval process.
My man.
Did Eidos wind up building their own studio for face scanning?
Yeah. We have our own booth in the studio, but since we were moving so far from the scanning part, I was only interested into getting the maximum I could get from the expression. So I didn't care too much about the details in the face and the color, the resolution of the texture or anything. That really didn't matter to me. So I just needed to make sure that all of the expression are coming in sharp and detailed, and you could see like the movement and the plasticity of the face.
Hold on a sec. You, this is really embarrassing. You have something on your face.
And then it was up to the cinematic team with Simon Habib, who actually worked a lot on this. He connected basically the blend shapes that I exported from these scans into faceware, and they basically had a full facial working in engine and in motion builder and Maya as well.
How many expressions do you wind up having? Or like how many, rather, let me rephrase
blend
that.
shapes?
Yeah, like how many facial expressions were scanned for everyone who was?
They were scanned around 40 something facial expressions.
Okay.
Yeah, and then when exported, they were around 140 something.
For the final blend shapes.
Yeah, because you have all the sides separately, like one side,
Right.
you know, and then the expressions themselves, they're broken up into parts. So upper lip left, upper lip right, and, you know, all of the different separations.
Oh, well, let me tell you. Now you have.
And then with these scans, I also managed to get the wrinkle maps as well. So I would bake the wrinkle maps and do like the plug them in the engine. We made like a mask where it basically allows us to specify the regions of the face that are moving, and they would show up the wrinkles in engine. For now, it was only normal map, so no base color. It will not affect the base color or anything, but it's just for the normal map, and yeah, and it worked.
This suit is so good. Look at that leather. You really know how to make leather shine. Jesus, that's a bad pun. I apologize. But you really know how to make it shine, you know, like look at that, like it's really convincing. Like it really looks to me like well, just this kind of very nice aged leather, you know, like with the normal map, the roughness, everything really comes together to really sell the surface here, you know. What's the secret to making really convincing leather?
So the most important part, I would say, is the actual folds that give you the leathery look. Like there's the specific shape to the folds that really screams leather basically as soon as you see it. And then the other thing is actually the micro details. They really help a lot to sell the look of it. All of the small creases and how they interact with each other, and the roughness part is actually very, very important. It's not very visible here, but in different lighting conditions, I use more roughness on the top part because it's being hit by the sun constantly. So the surface gets burned a little bit. So it feels a little bit rougher on the top part than the lower one. So for this one, when I modeled it, I did all the folds and everything, and there is actually no triangles baked in the base normal. So that's all coming from designer. And on top of that, the actual roughness and the micro folds are coming from designer. They are included in the same normal map and base color as the triangles themselves. So that's styling everywhere, and basically I could have always like super sharp and clean details.
Nice.
As far as other folds, everything is hand sculpted as well. These were fun to make.
Whoa! Those are so good.
That's it? That's all you wrote?
It was a character limitation.
So, Genc, I want to really thank you for all the time that you have spent with us. You have shared quite a lot of your knowledge there. We can definitely see that you're extremely passionate about what you do, and I think that's really wonderful.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really like a pleasure and an honor to be here and talk with you again on all of this stuff. People can follow me on ArtStation, on LinkedIn, on Facebook. I don't post much on Facebook, so yeah, ArtStation would be the best, basically. And on Twitter too.